Someone was living on Tom Dawson's land, not passing through, not hiding in the trees, living there. By the time Tom saw smoke rising from the Forgotten Ridge cabin, the broken window had been patched, fresh wood was stacked beneath the lean-to, and new boards crossed the roof. Whoever had come there was not begging for shelter. They had already claimed it. Tom Dawson believed a ranch survived only when a man watched every mile of it. Tom was the kind of man folks trusted with fences, deeds, and hard decisions. But even a strong man can mistake control for wisdom when loneliness has had years to harden him. I'm Abel Beecham, though most folks around these parts simply call me Mr. B. And I have learned this much about men like Tom Dawson. Sometimes they ride their borders to guard their land when what they are really guarding is their hearts. That morning, Tom thought he was searching for broken fences and stray cattle. He did not know he was riding toward the woman who would change him. So on a bitter morning in late winter, he rode the northern edge of Dawson Ranch with ice on his reins and a ledger tucked inside his coat. He knew every boundary marker, every waterhole, every weak stretch of fence waiting for repair. Dawson Ranch was vast, but Tom had not built it by chance. He had built it with maps, records, contracts, and a hard eye for trouble. And that morning, trouble rose in a thin gray line against the pale sky. Smoke. Tom pulled his horse to a stop. The smoke came from an old abandoned cabin on the ridge, a trapper's shack from years past that now belonged to Dawson Ranch. The last time he checked it, the roof had sagged, the window had been broken, and the door had hung loose on one hinge. But now, as he rode closer, his jaw tightened. Fresh wood was stacked beneath the lean-to. The window had been patched. New boards crossed the roof. Someone had taken a forgotten ruin on his land and turned it into shelter. Tom swung down from the saddle, boots crunching in the snow, one hand close to his rifle. Before he could call out, the cabin door opened. A woman stood in the doorway. She wore a faded wool coat, her dark hair tucked beneath a plain bonnet. A rifle rested low in one hand, not aimed, not shaking, just steady enough to tell Tom she was not helpless. Tom kept his hand near his own rifle but did not raise it. He looked past her through the open door. A small fire burned in the stove. Canvas covered cracks in the walls. The floor had been swept clean. This was no drifter's hiding place. This was a home someone had fought to make. "You know whose land this is?" Tom asked. "Yours," she said. "Thomas Dawson." "Then you know you're trespassing." "I know. No begging. No lying. No fear." "Name?" "Nora Bell." The wind pushed snow around her boots, but she did not step back. "I had land at Willow Bend," she said. "Garrett Morrow filed false papers saying I sold it to him. I never did." Tom had heard Morrow's name before, a smooth land broker with a cold smile and friends in town offices. Nora lifted her chin. "I came here because winter was coming and this cabin was empty. I am not asking you to save me." Tom studied her face. "What are you asking?" Her answer came quiet and steady. "To survive the winter," she said. "Without owing any man my freedom." Tom stood in the snow, looking at Nora Bell as the wind swept loose snow across the ridge. A trespasser should have been easy to deal with. Tom could warn her, give her a date to leave, and write her name in his ledger. But Nora had not stolen from him. She had only taken shelter in a forgotten cabin. And somehow, she had made the ruined place livable again. Still, Dawson land had rules. "You can stay through winter," Tom said. Nora's eyes sharpened. "Under what terms?" "You work for the ranch. Fence lines. Stock checks. Whatever needs doing. Come thaw. The agreement ends. You leave, owing me nothing." Nora glanced back at the fire inside the cabin, then faced him again. "I want it written." Tom nodded. "So do I. And any supplies come out of my wages," she said. "Flour, nails, repairs, all of it. I will not take charity." Tom understood then. Nora was not afraid of work. She was afraid of debt. Not the kind written in a ledger, but the kind some men expected a woman to pay with her freedom. Tom removed his glove and held out his hand. Fair exchange. Nora looked at his hand for a long moment. Then she shifted the rifle safely to her other side and took his hand. And on that frozen ridge, their first bond was not built on pity. It was built on fairness. By the end of the first week, every man on Dawson Ranch knew Nora Bell was no helpless woman hiding from winter. She rose before daylight. She carried feed. She rode the outer pastures with her scarf pulled high, marking weak rails and snow-choked gates. Tom watched from a distance at first. He told himself it was caution. Then one gray afternoon, Nora rode hard into the yard, her horse blowing steam in the cold. "The North Trough is freezing solid," she called. "Another night, and the cattle will break for the creek." Tom rode out with Nora and 2 ranch hands. She was right. Ice had sealed the trough, and the herd was restless with thirst. They broke the ice with axes before dusk. Ben Tolliver, the oldest hand, gave Nora a slow nod. Good catch. On Dawson Ranch, that meant more than praise. That evening, after the horses were put away, Tom noticed Nora holding one hand tight against her coat. 2 fingers were red and stiff from the cold. He brought warm water, salve, and a clean pair of gloves from the supply room. "Earned," he said. Nora looked at the gloves, then at him. For once, she did not argue. She accepted them quietly. 2 nights later, Tom spent hours in the calving shed, fighting to keep a sick newborn calf alive. When he finally stepped into the cookhouse, he found a covered plate by the stove. Beans, bread, hot coffee, no note, no speech, just care, waiting in the firelight. 3 mornings later, Tom rode into Ash Hollow with Nora's story heavy in his chest. The town looked peaceful under snow. But Tom knew danger did not always carry a gun. Sometimes it sat behind a desk with clean cuffs and a bottle of ink. At the county records office, the clerk went pale when Tom asked for the Willow Bend deed. "Old business, Mr. Dawson," he muttered. "Filed proper." "Then show me." The clerk hesitated, Tom noticed. At last, the clerk laid the papers on the counter. There was Nora Bell's name, Garrett Morrow's name, a claim of sale, and at the bottom, Nora's supposed signature. Tom stared at it. The letters were wrong, too curled, too careful, nothing like the plain, firm hand Nora used on their winter agreement. "This is forged," Tom said. The clerk swallowed. "I wouldn't know." But Tom did know. By sundown, after checking with 2 men who had witnessed Nora's original claim, the truth was plain. Garrett Morrow had stolen Willow Bend with paper. No gun, no night raid, just ink and a clerk willing to look away. When Tom stepped into the snowy street, Morrow was waiting across the road in a dark coat. "Careful, Dawson," Morrow called. "Around here papers speak louder than pride, and I know who keeps the papers." The street went quiet. Then his smile sharpened. "Folks are wondering what that woman gave you for shelter." Tom's hand curled at his side. For one hard second, he wanted to cross the street and silence him. But he remembered Nora asking to survive without owing any man her freedom. So Tom stopped. A street fight would only make Morrow's lie stronger. And in that cold street, Tom understood Nora's stolen claim was only the beginning. Morrow had friends in county offices. He had rumors spreading through town. And now, because Tom had stood with Nora, Morrow was looking for a way to come after Dawson Ranch, too. By the next market day, Garrett Morrow's lies had spread through Ash Hollow. At the Mercantile, voices lowered when Nora's name was spoken. At the livery, men who once nodded to Tom looked away. By the courthouse steps, someone had nailed a crooked board to a post. One word was painted across it, claim jumper. It meant land thief. Tom tore the sign down and snapped it across his knee. But anger did not quiet the town. That afternoon, inside the county records office, he found 2 new complaints filed against Nora. Trespass. Disorderly settlement. And beneath them lay another paper that made his blood turn cold. a challenge to the Dawson Ranch boundary near the ridge cabin. The message was plain. Protect her, and I will come for you too. Tom rode back under a hard gray sky with the notices tucked inside his coat. Nora was outside the cabin, splitting kindling when he reached the ridge. He stepped down from his horse and handed her the papers. She read them slowly. Her face did not crumble, and somehow that hurt worse. I can ride into town tonight, Tom said. I can make Morrow understand. Nora folded the notices and held them tight. No. He is lying about you. I know. That is why we cannot meet lies with fists. The wind pulled at her coat. Still, she stood straight. If we win, she said, we win clean. We win where everyone can see. Tom looked toward Ash Hollow, hidden beyond miles of snow. Every instinct in him wanted force, but Nora's courage held him still. The bravest person on Dawson land was the woman refusing to be saved. The wrong way. The next morning, Tom came up the ridge with 2 wagons behind him. Nora stepped out of the cabin and frowned at the load. Lumber, stovepipe, blankets, nails, a new latch, a pane of glass wrapped in burlap. Ben Tolliver climbed down from the first wagon, stiff-kneed and quiet. 2 other ranch hands followed. Nora looked from the supplies to Tom. That is a lot of wages. Tom nodded. Then you will be busy earning them. For a moment she only stared. Then the corner of her mouth softened. By noon, hammer blows rang across the ridge. The men patched the roof. Tom fitted the stovepipe. Ben cut boards for the inner wall. Nora held the ladder steady, hauled lumber, drove nails, and worked harder than any of them. No one called it charity. No one spoke down to her. By evening, the cabin looked different. Not grand, not soft, but stronger, safer, earned. That night, a hard wind trapped them on the ridge for a few hours. Snow lashed the walls, but the repaired roof held. The patched window stayed firm. The new stovepipe drew clean, and warmth filled the room. Ben and the 2 ranch hands rested near the wall, wrapped in blankets, until the wind eased enough for them to ride back down. Tom sat near the table looking at the stacked wood, the mended coats, and the lamplight on Nora's face. For the first time, the cabin did not feel like a trespass. It felt like a promise. And promises, Tom was beginning to learn, were dangerous things to care about. In late February, the sky turned black before noon. Wind roared down from the north. Snow followed sideways, swallowing fence posts, cattle trails, and the hills beyond the ranch yard. Tom stood outside the barn when a young ranch hand rode hard through the drifts. "Eastern lines down," the boy shouted. "Cattle are pushing toward the ravine." Tom was in the saddle before the word settled. Men grabbed ropes and lanterns. Horses fought the wind as they turned east. If the herd reached the ravine, the ranch would lose more than cattle. It would lose lives. Near the yard fence, Tom saw Nora already tightening the cinch on her saddle. "No," he called. "You stay. That fence is near my cabin. That storm will kill you. Then it can try." Before he could stop her, she swung into the saddle and rode beside him. The eastern pasture was chaos. The fence had split wide open. Cattle surged through the gap toward the drop beyond the ridge, bawling in terror. Tom and the hands spread out, shouting and swinging ropes to turn the herd. Then Ben Tolliver's horse slipped on ice hidden beneath the snow. Ben hit the frozen ground near a broken post, and his horse scrambled away into the storm. "Ben!" Tom shouted. But the herd was still moving. For one terrible moment, Tom had to choose between the cattle and the man. Nora chose first. She drove her horse across the herd's path, cracked a rope into the wind, and shouted until the lead cattle turned from the ravine. Tom saw his chance and rode hard with the ranch hands, pushing the herd back from the ravine. Little by little, they pushed the herd away from the ravine. Only then did Tom reach Ben. The old hand lay half buried in snow, breathing shallow, his face gray with pain. Nora dropped beside him and pulled off one glove to check his face and hands. "He's hurt bad," she said, "and he's freezing through." Tom looked at Ben's twisted leg, then toward the main ranch house. It was too far. He turned toward the ridge cabin, barely visible through the white dark, with smoke bending hard from its chimney. "Can we get him there?" Nora met his eyes. "We have to." So they wrapped Ben in saddle blankets, lifted him between them, and carried him through the screaming storm toward the one warm light, still holding against the dark. Inside the ridge cabin, the storm beat against the walls like it wanted to tear the roof away. The stove burned red. Ben Tolliver lay on Nora's narrow bed, wrapped in every blanket they had. His face was pale from cold, his injured leg stretched stiff beneath the covers. Nora moved with steady hands. She cut the frozen cloth away from his leg, washed the blood from his skin, and packed warmth around him one blanket at a time. Tom kept the fire alive. He broke kindling, fed the stove, and melted snow in a pot for water. By nightfall, fever had taken hold. Ben's face shone with sweat, and pain twisted through him whenever he stirred. Nora pressed cool rags to his forehead and leaned close when his eyes opened wild with fear. "You're safe, Ben," she whispered. "You are not out there anymore." Tom watched Nora fight for Ben's life with the same courage she had shown in the pasture. Only this courage was quieter. No horse, no rope, no shouting into the wind. Just patience, tenderness, and a woman refusing to let an old ranch hand slip away. Near midnight, Ben's fever eased, his breathing slowed, and he sank into sleep. Nora sat back in the chair beside the bed, pale with exhaustion. Tom placed another log in the stove. "You saved him," he said softly. "We both did." Tom looked at the fire. "I have trusted rules my whole life because rules never asked me to feel." Nora turned toward him. "Landlines, deeds, ledgers, contracts. I understood those things," he said. "But people are harder. People can leave. People can make you afraid of losing what you never meant to love." Nora looked down at her hands. "I fear help," she said. "Because help has always come with a hook in it." Tom listened. "Morrow stole my land. Other men offered kindness and expected ownership, so I learned to stand alone." The wind shook the window. Tom wanted to reach for her hand, but he did not. He let the choice stay hers. "Nora," he said quietly, "I will never make a cage out of kindness." Her eyes lifted to his. For a moment, there was only firelight, Ben sleeping, and snow melting in the pot. "I believe you," she whispered. And in that little cabin, while winter raged outside, Tom understood that some promises were stronger than paper. Morning came pale and bitter with the storm crawling away over the eastern hills. Outside the ridge cabin, the world lay buried in white. Ben was weak, but his fever had broken. That should have been mercy enough. Then Nora stepped outside to bring in firewood and froze. Near the broken fence line, the storm had stripped snow from a row of fresh survey stakes. At first, she thought one was a branch. Then she saw another. And another. Survey stakes. Fresh ones. Tom saw her staring and followed as she pushed through the drifts toward the ridge. "These were not here before," she said. Tom crouched and brushed snow from the nearest stake. Morrow's mark was burned into the wood. Nora looked from the stakes to the ravine, then back to the shattered fence. "They cut the line," she said. "They drove the cattle this way." Tom's jaw hardened. "To make it look like my herd crossed disputed land." "And to make the broken fence look like your neglect," Nora said. Then something metal glinted near a half-buried fence post. Nora bent and picked it from the snow. A survey marker tag, torn loose from one of the fresh stakes, dropped by men who had worked too fast in the storm. Stamped with Garrett Morrow's initials. For once, the proof was not hidden in a courthouse drawer. It lay cold and plain in Nora's palm. Tom looked at it. This is enough to accuse him. Nora closed her fingers around the tag. "No," she said. "Not until everyone sees it." By noon, a rider from Ash Hollow brought word that Morrow had called a public land hearing. He meant to shame Nora. He meant to paint Tom as a bully rancher. He meant to bury truth beneath noise. But this time, Nora did not lower her eyes. She turned to Tom, the marker tag still tight in her hand. "Let him call his hearing," she said. "We will bring the truth with us." 2 days later, the Ash Hollow town hall was packed when Tom and Nora arrived. Farmers stood along the back wall. Ranch hands crowded near the door. At the front stood Garrett Morrow in a fine black coat, smiling like judgment already belonged to him. Beside him sat the county clerk, pale and stiff, with the land book stacked before him. Nora walked in with her head high. Tom walked beside her, but not in front of her. This was the day Nora Bell would speak her own name back into honor. Morrow faced the crowd. "Good people of Ash Hollow," he said, "Mr. Dawson has bent the law for a woman with no rightful claim." A murmur moved through the hall. "She settled on his land," Morrow continued, "questioned a legal sale at Willow Bend, and now his cattle have crossed onto disputed ground." Tom felt anger rise, but Nora touched his sleeve once. They had come to win with truth, not anger. Tom stepped forward and held up the copy of Nora's false deed. "I trusted papers my whole life," he said. "I believed if a deed was filed, it was true. But corrupt men can twist paper until it looks like law. This says Nora Bell sold Willow Bend. She did not." Morrow scoffed. "Prove it." Tom laid Nora's winter agreement on the table beside the deed. "Her true signature is here, plain and firm. Nothing like the forgery on that deed." The clerk's face tightened. Then Nora stepped forward. "My name is Nora Bell," she said. "I built my cabin at Willow Bend. I dug the garden. I set stones around the spring. I never sold it." Her voice stayed calm. "I took shelter on the ridge because winter was coming. Mr. Dawson gave me work for shelter. Wages counted. No debt. No claim over me." Ben Tolliver rose slowly on his crutch. "She tells it true," Ben said, leaning hard on the crutch. "That woman rode into a storm most men would have run from. She turned the herd, then sat by my bed until the fever let go." One by one, the ranch hands stood behind him. Morrow slammed his hand on the table. "Sentiment is not evidence." Nora opened her palm and set the survey marker tag before the clerk. "Then read that." The clerk looked down. His face drained white. Tom spoke quietly. "We found fresh survey stakes by the broken fence. We found that tag in the snow." "That is a lie," Morrow snapped. But his voice had lost its strength. All eyes turned to the clerk. The man trembled. At last he broke. "Morrow paid me to file the deed," he whispered. "Miss Bell never signed it. I knew it, and I kept quiet. Then he told me to mark the ridge boundary after the storm." The room went silent. Morrow lunged toward the clerk, but two ranch hands caught him before he reached the table. His fine coat twisted, his smooth smile vanished, and Ash Hollow finally saw him clearly. Not a broker, a thief with ink on his hands. Nora stood perfectly still as months of shame slipped from her shoulders. Her shoulders eased, her eyes glistened, and she breathed in deeply, as though the whole room had finally given her back the air. Tom looked at her and understood at last. Rules were only as honest as the people brave enough to defend them. And that day, Nora Bell had carried the truth into the open, without bowing once. By sundown, Garrett Morrow's name had turned bitter in every mouth in Ash Hollow. Inside the town hall, the clerk corrected the land book with shaking hands. And there, in clean ink, Willow Bend was restored to Nora Bell. Her land, her spring, her cabin, her name. For a long moment, Nora stared at the page. Then she touched her name with one finger, as if making sure it would not vanish. Tom stood beside her, silent. This victory belonged to her. Outside the town hall, the crowd waited in the cold. Some looked ashamed. Some offered quiet apologies that came late, but honestly. Ben Tolliver leaned on his crutch near the wagon. The ranch hand stood nearby, watching Nora with respect no rumor could ever take away. Tom removed his hat. "Nora," he said, loud enough for all to hear, "Willow Bend is yours again. You owe Dawson Ranch nothing. You owe me nothing." The crowd fell silent. "You are free to go back with your land, your wages, and your good name." Nora looked at the road out of town, then back at Tom. The man who had once trusted ledgers more than feelings. The man who had warmed her frostbitten hands and asked for nothing. The man who had stood before the town and let truth matter more than pride. "I have a home at Willow Bend," she said. Tom nodded, though it hurt him. "Yes, you do." Nora turned, so every person who had whispered about her could hear. "But a home is more than land," she said. "And I am not choosing because I have nowhere else to go. I am choosing because now I do." She stepped closer and took Tom's hand. "I choose the ridge. I choose the ranch. I choose the life we can build with honest hands. And Tom, if you will have me as a partner, not a debt or dependent, then I choose you." Tom held her hand like it was sacred. "As my equal," he said, "in land and life." He bent his head slowly, giving her every chance to turn away. Nora rose to meet him, and their first kiss was not a claim. It was a promise freely given. By spring, Willow Bend was tended again and kept in Nora's name. By summer, wildflowers bloomed around the ridge cabin, and the old ruined place stood strong against the wind. The main ranch house became their daily home in the valley. But the ridge cabin was never left forgotten again, and in the fall, beneath a gold cottonwood tree, Tom Dawson and Nora Bell were married quietly, with Ben Tolliver standing on a healed leg and grinning like a proud old fool. From that day on, Willow Bend remained Nora's. Dawson Ranch remained honest. And the ridge cabin remained a reminder of where two guarded hearts had first learned to trust. The first time Tom rode to that ridge, he thought he had found trouble. Instead, he had found a woman who refused to be owned. And Norah, who had lost nearly everything to a man's false kindness, had found something she never thought she would trust again. A love with open hands. A home without chains. And a life chosen freely, faithfully, and without fear.